Hello, welcome to my home garden. I'm happy to give you a tour today of the front and the back just to give you some tips and ideas for gardening. My name is Nancy Robertson. I'm a realtor with Sotheby's International Realty Canada, but I'm also a former landscape designer and a master gardener. Welcome. It's early spring. You can tell it's early spring because the magnolias about to bloom. The rhododendrons have budded and you can see the purple in the buds. And over here you can see the hellebores that are in full bloom. They're gorgeous. Spring cleanup would include trimming off this kind of dead plant material from last fall, and you would sweep, carefully rake up the leaves around your perennials. You have to be very careful. Number one, you've got to worry about compacting the soil, so you want to be careful about trampling back and forth on it. And then you also have to be careful that you don't step on any of the new buds, and you can see that obviously somebody has stepped on it. One of the big spring chores, which I find incredibly meditative, is pruning. This hydrangea on my right needs pruning at this time of year, but this Japanese maple will not be pruned at all, ever. Should always be left planted as it is. When we get to the back, we're going to talk about garden design. But up here is a classic example of how you need structure in a garden. So we've created structure by bringing in the big boulders and the hardscaping of the flagstone pathway. Very important part in a successful garden design is to incorporate some of that in with your plant material. It's never just about the plant material. So spring is my favorite time, one of my favorite times of the year. They're all my favorites, really. And gardeners will like every time of the year. But you can see where the sedum in the back there needs to have the old dead flower heads from the fall pruned off. And then if you come around, you'll see, things, little bits of tidying like this to be done. And then, you gotta love the spring. Look at the colors and look at the texture, because gardening is about texture too. So look at the textures. Over here on this side, we have a very mature lavender bush, and lavender is almost not hardy here in our, depending on where it is planted in your garden. But this all can be pruned off, and then you're left with a beautiful shrub that will bloom later in the summer. So you can see we have a giant perennial grass here. It's one of the miscanthus. It was pruned back in the fall. It could be left through the winter time, and you'll see one in the back garden that we left. So this is all, the pruning's all done here. There's nothing more to do. You'll see some green shoots coming up. So in this corner of the garden, I just want to point out that the viburnum in the back doesn't get pruned at all. The hydrangea will get pruned. Now that hydrangea is a very mature old hydrangea bush. I love it to death. It will probably take me 1.5 to 2 hours to prune that. And this is a lilac bush, and it's about to flower. So we're not going to touch that at all until after it's bloomed. And then if you just look beyond the red chairs, you can see there's a miscanthus, one of the perennial grasses I have. That one is unpruned, and I left it like that because it kind of is interesting all through the fall and through the winter. But now I've got to prune it back in the spring in order for the new leaves to grow into the plant. Let's continue the discussion about pruning, shall we? Pruning a hydrangea takes time. In fact, pruning most shrubs do take time. The general rule is 30% max. Hydrangeas bloom, these are PGs, they're almost tree-like, and they bloom on new wood. So in the early spring, you prune them back, and you're pruning to control growth and also to encourage blossoms where you want them. So this shrub has not been pruned yet. They were both about the same age, or same height rather, and you can see how I've pruned it to give it a little bit of room in the inside, so lots of sunshine and air can get in the inside. I've pruned out dead wood, and then I've carefully selected where I want the growth. I want a little bit of height, and then I want to fill out in the middle. The thing about pruning is that, in fact, you're not pruning to keep it short. Pruning is done in order to encourage growth. So if you actually look at this shrub that hasn't been pruned, you can see where I pruned it before. There's the cutting from the cut mark from last year, and you can see 2 branches came out from that cutting, where I cut, because there's 2 nodes on either side of the branch. So you actually, when you prune, you're pruning to encourage growth, and that's really important to know. All right, just for as an example, for those of you who are about to prune your hydrangea or your rose bush, I know it takes great courage to make that first cut. And I know that from my own personal experience. I have that same issue. So let's just give, as an example, let's take this shrub. And 2 years ago, last year, I gave it a very light pruning. So this year, I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive in the pruning because I need to control the overall size of the plant structure. And it might take me, I don't know, a good half an hour to do this shrub. So I'm not going to do this for this demonstration, but I am going to show you that, for instance, I'm trying to be aggressive here. So I'm looking at this branch, I'm looking at the branch in the overall shrub, and I'm actually going to take this back right there, and you're going to cut it on an angle right above a growth node. See? So it's going to actually, 2 little branches will sprout out of that growth node moving forward. And then you're going to do that, okay, so that's the first one. You're going to go up here and think, okay, if that's there, then I'm actually going to take this back, I think, right as far as that, because I would like to. And you can see it's quite healthy and all ready to roll, and then you go all the way through your shrub that way. This garden is a mixture of, it's mostly a perennial garden. I do add annuals for color. I have planters that I always plant with annuals, and I will put blocks of color in the garden with annuals. Certainly we had a wedding last summer and we filled the garden with annuals. But for the most part, this is a perennial garden, so you can see that the plants have died right back and they're just starting to come back. People make a mistake when they're doing their garden, a first-time gardener, for instance, and they'll only put one of a certain plant in the garden. You need a little bit of size, so you gotta plant more than one perennial in order for it to look good. So to finish this very brief garden tour, I want to talk about design in a garden, because there are some key elements to every garden, and it involves the structure. You have to always put the bones into the garden. It's like a house. The walls are the bones. Well, out here, the bones are the fencing, the trees, the evergreens, the pathways. And then in this garden, we have red Muskoka chairs that definitely provide some visual point of interest. But you'll notice that we've got some evergreen shrub hedges all the way along that provides a really strong background to the plant material that's planted in front of it. And then in front of it, we have a combination of shrubs and perennials. And finally, one tip, if you're creating a garden where there was nothing before but grass, here's a very valuable tip. The most important part is you got to get rid of the turf. To scrape the turf off is hard work, and also it's got to go somewhere. So my suggestion is that you plot out your new garden with a hose, cover it with some sheets of newspaper, and you're going to put a good batch of newspaper down, and then cover it with compost or manure and let the garden sit for 6 months. So you're doing some planning in advance. That will kill your grass. The worms will bring, it's a very environmentally friendly way to do things. The worms will come up and integrate your manure and your compost in through the newspaper. It works like a charm. I've done it over and over and over. Highly recommend. That's all I have to say. There's so much more that I could say, but I'm going to cut it short now. I'm happy to help. Reach out if you have any questions. Please have a wonderful spring. Enjoy your garden and stay safe and healthy.